Good afternoon. Welcome to the next webinar in our Just in Time series. Today we're talking about the Payment Protection Program. We're going to do a quick poll right now, and then we'll set up our conversation. So if you would just answer these questions, did you apply for one? Are you not? Are you still going to apply? This will kind of just frame our conversation. So, and as you do that, I just wanted to, hi, I'm Ann Hendry with the Nonprofit Association in the Midlands. And we decided to hold this webinar today because with the PPP program, some banks are offering lots of good forms and guidance, some aren't. The bottom line is the SBA has been slow in coming out with guidance on all aspects of this program. So we thought it would be a good opportunity to have just some ideas on how you can track your loan yourself. So I do want to just say a couple of things. It is Monday, May 18th at 12:03 p.m. Anything may change between now and tomorrow as it relates to the PPP program. We're seeing it change all the time. Want to make sure that you realize this is not legal advice nor financial advice, but just current information as we know it. So as many of you know, the Paycheck Protection Program was part of the CARES Act that was passed in late March of this year. It was really designed to help you to keep your staff on hand and cover payroll and rent. And we just want to help our members better understand this process. So I do also want to stress that if your bank is giving you advice, follow your bank's advice. Great. Okay. So the poll, everybody has applied and been approved. Great. That's what we thought, but we wanted to check so we could just make sure our remarks were helpful to the audience at that. So there's been 2 rounds of PPP, phase 1 and phase 2. There were some minor changes in between. Lots of different ways to handle it. We're seeing it from, organizations just applying, organizations getting board approval before they apply. You need to do what's best for you, and we'll take it from there. And I think the same with how you then start tracking it. You definitely just want to have a system so you can be transparent and accountable. So with that, let me just introduce our 2 subject matter experts today. Chris Bobbitt is with 1909 Accounting, and she's had 10 clients that she's helped with PPP program, either apply, track, or a combination thereof. Tracy Shutt is a NAM employee. She runs our financial management services program, contract accountant, and 15 of her clients have applied for that. So I'm going to turn it over to them to kind of talk about what their experience is and what they've seen with their clients with NAM. And all transparency, Chris is NAM's accountant. And with that, Chris, let's take it away.
So I thought I'd talk about what I've done for my clients once they receive the funds. And I think the first thing I needed to do was communicate with them, is forgiveness really their goal? Because I could see some of them, hey, this is a lower interest rate than our line of credit. So maybe we're, if we're not going to meet the requirements to get forgiveness, we're going to go ahead and just keep the money and pay it off. So far, nobody has said that. They all want forgiveness. So we have then moved forward like it's a restricted grant. And lucky for us, we're in the nonprofit industry. We know how to track restricted grants. So I can imagine some of the private industries that are like, what, we don't know how to do this. So I think the first thing that I would recommend doing is get a budget together just for those funds and plan it out for your 8-week period. Figure out what your 8-week period is. And that's called the covered period. So they just released the forgiveness application on Friday. Go to the Small Business Administration website, find that, and read about the covered period. So you want to see what expenses you're going to have in that 8-week period. You're going to have payroll, you might have utilities, you might have rent and mortgage interest. And you need to know the requirements for that. You need to know that for forgiveness, you got to have 75% needs to be your payroll costs of the loan. And then there's also the full-time equivalent requirement. And those are all spelled out in that forgiveness application. I update that with every payroll and also when I have utility bills. And then I'll share that with the executive director and the treasurer if need be. I think staying on top of that is very important so that everybody knows where we're at. It's like, hey, we're going to be about $5,000 short on our payroll costs. So what are we going to do about that? How are we going to plan for that? Do we need to do a payroll early? Do we need to do some bonuses? That I think that's very, very important to do the planning part of that. As far as QuickBooks, set up a customer for your PPP plan funds so that you can track it basically like you would do a restricted grant. And in QuickBooks Desktop, that would be a customer. In QuickBooks Online, use the project feature. It's fabulous. Then at a moment's notice, you can see how much you've spent on those funds. Read your loan agreement to see if you need to have a separate bank account. Most are not requiring that. And then you need to make sure that your accountant knows how to book those funds. It's a long-term liability. You need to accrue interest from the data disbursement. And then how to book that upon forgiveness. It becomes income once it's forgiven. And the same way with that accrued interest. So make sure that you're on top of that, kind of do some research on how that should all look in your financials. You shouldn't see any income for it yet. It should be on your balance sheet. So I think that's all I had, Anne, for what I'm doing for you guys. It's really just the budgeting and keeping that up to date.
Thanks, Chris. Tracy, do you have anything to add? Is that similar to how you're working with your clients and tracking these loans?
It is. I'm probably doing a little bit less. We've got a lot of smaller clients, and so the executive directors are taking on kind of a larger role, but I'm running the reports and with the spending just so that they can track it. But I think that what Chris has suggested is probably a good idea for me to add to make sure that they're on track and kind of maybe up that game instead of doing it just monthly after each payroll period, and to see how that projects out. I've got maybe 4 of my clients that have new bank accounts. Some are new banks and some are within their same banking structure, but just new accounts. Some of them are pulling their payroll directly from these accounts, and some are transferring it. I think one of the things too, if you're pulling the payroll directly from your PPP account, if you've set up a new account, you have to make sure, or in your tracking, they are not covering the employer portion of FICA. And so that's something that you need to make sure that is pulled out when you're doing the forgiveness. I mean, the funds are there, and if it's pulling the payroll, it's using it, but you can't use it as part of your tracking. Yeah, I was going to say it's in theory, it's fairly simple. In practice, I think it's going to be a little bit less simple. But it's just making sure that you've got it's federal money, and so you have to treat it kind of like a federal grant, and make sure that you've got every piece of information and documentation available for the forgiveness piece of it.
Thanks. A couple of questions that have been coming in. And you alluded to this, treat it like it's a federal grant. If you get other federal funding streams, can you use these funds along with that? And the answer is no, you can't double dip. Sorry about that, track it. Although, as with any grant, look at either your federal grant or from other funders, can you maybe get an extension and move things around for a grant adjustment, I think is always smart. We have a handful of questions here, so feel free, folks on the webinar, to type in your questions. When does the covered or 8-week period begin? What's the start date?
So in reading the forgiveness application, they walk through that. So in general, it's the date of disbursement. So when you get those funds in your account, they are doing little adjustment for payroll. So it falls better within your pay period. So read the forgiveness application. It will talk about covered. It says covered period, and there's an alternative covered period. And from what I read, you can use payroll for one and the other expenses for the other covered period. But that forgiveness application is where you need to start with that.
Sounds good. Another question, can you pay your payroll early in order to fall in that 8-week time period?
I believe you can, but with that alternative covered period, you may not have to. So read through that. You can use kind of the accrual method for payroll instead of cash basis. So read through that. I had one client that I was able to be with that alternative covered period, was able to adjust their pay dates. And now we've met the 75% requirement, and we don't have to do any early pay periods or hazard pay or anything. So that makes a big difference.
So I think it's just another reason to emphasize how to have a good working relationship with your accountant or bookkeeper so they can help navigate you through this process. Can you pay hazard pay or what I'm calling COVID bonuses if you have extra funds in your loan?
From what I'm reading, you can. Tracy, have you heard anything on that?
Well, just what one of our board members has suggested, that it's hazard pay. I mean, if
yes,
you're working and that it's considered hazard pay. That I don't know that bonus is necessarily the right.
Don't use that term.
Well,
Fair.
and I think, I was going to say, and I'll just jump in because we were kind of in the same vein. One of the things that we're doing at NAM is to help our employees with their internet costs if they're working from home. And so we were initially calling it a stipend, but a stipend is a payroll expense. I guess potentially that's reimbursable as well, but it puts a tax burden on the employee. So we're calling that a reimbursement, and internet is one of the utility expenses that's forgivable.
mm-hmm.
Thanks, Tracy. And I know many organizations are doing this. For those staff that are working from home, we're paying $50 a month for internet because Rosie's using her internet at home to work for NAM. So that'll go on as long as this goes on. We'll just see how that goes. Any other questions out there? One thing I wanted to make sure people were aware of, because this just came out last week, and this helps me reiterate that guidance is changing all the time on this. So you really need to stay on top of it. On May 13th, the determination was made that if your loan was $2 million or less, they would assume that you had that good faith effort. I believe it was in the second round of PPP. You had to justify the financial hardship. And so as I'm reading the guidance, if it's 2 million or less, they will consider that good faith effort. If it's more than 2 million, you will have some type of audit through the SBA. Another question, what's the site again for the updated rules on time period of coverage? Is that just sba.gov?
Yes, and they have the loan forgiveness application is what it is. And it's on the Small Business Administration's website.
Oh, and I see that Robert Patterson just shared the direct link with everybody. Robert is always on it. Thank you. Another question, can you clarify that utilities are approved? She didn't think that internet was considered a utility under PPP.
Yes, it is. That was my initial thought was it shouldn't be, but ever since the last couple of weeks, I've been hearing it is, and I believe it's listed out someplace on the SBA, either in their frequently asked questions or in this forgiveness application.
And I think the confusion there is with other federal programs, internet is not considered a utility, but in this particular case, it is. Great. Other questions? So it was pretty, for those of you, the results of our second Pulse poll came out last week, and they're listed on the NAM website under the COVID research page. And of the 210 organizations that responded to the poll, 157 applied for a PPP loan. I think Nebraska had one of the highest rates of applying. Another question. Do we need copies of all these bills, or will a QuickBook reports be fine for the forgiveness documents?
Copies of bills. If you go through the forgiveness application, which I did yesterday, you need to have copies of bills, proof of payment, So just the QuickBooks printout's not going to cover it. So they need proof that it was paid.
They need to show. So it could be a simple, kind of like as you would do an employee expense report. You know, document it, track it, keep the receipts attached to it.
Right. Think of it as your audit.
Yeah.
What your auditor would want to see. So they're going to want to see a canceled check or where it came out in your bank statement.
And, you know, that's a good point, Chris, because then this time next year, when we're all in the middle of the 2020 audit, we'll have our stuff all together.
That's right. Right.
Because it may be hard to remember. I hope it's hard to remember by that point in time.
Yes.
Another question, are cell phone costs and data plans considered an allowable utility expense?
It says telephone under eligible non-payroll costs. So I would assume that means landlines and cell phones.
That's fair enough. So it's just amazing to me how fast all this has changed, you know, from when, you know, the bill just passed March 27th, which feels like a long time ago in COVID years, but it's really not, I think, as things go forward. Okay, can we provide the link to the document that Chris is referencing for utilities? I think that's the same as what Robert sent. It's the
correct. Yes, and there's a section that says summary of costs eligible for forgiveness, and it's item number 2, eligible non-payroll costs. It's down at the bottom of the page.
It's a long document. I think it's what, like 11 pages.
Yes.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind, it's not just those 11 pages, but you'll want to thoroughly read the promissory note that you signed with your bank to see if they want additional information. We saw that in the application phase, like our bank. In addition to just filling out the request, we also had to provide additional information. So read that promissory note, see what else you need to do, talk to your banker, because they're all going to be the same, but just enough nuance that I'm really glad I don't have Chris and Tracy's job of trying to figure out which bank is wanting which item. I only have to worry about it for one bank. Another question, if we get hit a second time, maybe in the fall, what are the possibilities they'll provide another round of funding to nonprofits to apply a second time? Okay, the short answer, I'll start this one and feel free to dive in. The short answer is we don't know. Although with that said, there are still several rounds that we expect to happen sooner rather than later. Because there's CARES 2.0 is being discussed, which will, there's talk about carving out specific nonprofit money for that. There are the HEROES programs, and then the Federal Reserve will be working with Treasury on their Main Street Loan Program. I'm not optimistic that nonprofits will be in the Main Street Loan Program, but we're trying to advocate for that. So I think we're going to see some more yet this spring into summer, and then we'll see what it brings. Okay, another question. Can we explain why this is called a loan, but we're treating it as a grant?
So right now it is a loan. If your goal is to have the loan forgived, then it kind of turns into a grant if it does eventually get forgived. So right now we need to treat it as a loan and show it on the balance sheet that way. And then hopefully after you do the application, have it forgiven, it will become income. But I think in our minds, we need to think of it as a restricted grant and track the expenses as such.
That makes a lot of sense. So then would I book it as a liability when it comes in initially?
Yes, it's a long-term liability.
Okay. Because I think the other thing to keep in mind, this PPP program applies to for-profit and nonprofit.
Correct.
So I can see, I mean, some organizations, they keep it as a loan, as a long-term low interest loan.
Sure.
And we're encouraging nonprofits to try and get forgiveness. But if for any reason it didn't work out for you, let's say, you know, you started out with 10 employees, but you don't have 10 at the end of June, that you might not be able to have that loan. Yes, somebody want to know if we're recording it. Yes, it's being recorded. We will share. I suspect it'll get posted on our YouTube channel. So let me ask a question if people want to answer in the chat box. So how's your experience as far as setting up a tracking system? Has your bank been giving you good guidelines? Is your accountant walking you through it? Do you feel like you're lost in the wilderness? Or any other questions that people have? Oh, the silence that comes with Zoom meeting. We see that somebody's using Pinnacle Bank and they gave them a spreadsheet. Accountant's been excellent, but very helpful to providing all the payroll costs. Because it does get tricky. You know, you alluded to it, you can pay 75% of payroll, but you can't pay the federal portions of some of the, like FICA, Social Security, you can't cover that. So you need somebody that can help you divide that out. You can play, my understanding is for benefits, it is health insurance, dental, and vision are acceptable. Okay, and I see Security National has been providing too. Some banks are providing tools and some aren't. And I think a lot of it just goes to the uncertainty. The banks are waiting on guidance.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Somebody said semi-lost as guidance has been slow or non-existent and banks get the information at the same time we do. True. I just reached out to our banker Friday afternoon. I reached out to Mo and said, any idea on loan forgiveness? He said, nope, I'm not hearing anything. And then over the weekend it came out. So here's a question. Is life insurance benefit reimbursable?
I've heard not.
That's my understanding. It's
Yeah,
not.
disability and life insurance, not. It's basically health, dental, vision.
Great, thank you.
And I have a question, and I probably shouldn't be asking questions since I'm on, but maybe somebody else is thinking the same. I would assume that it is is it the full amount of your health insurance, or is it because part of the employee payment sometimes, you know, but if we're covering payroll, I'm not sure how that works. Anybody have guidance on that or heard anything about it?
My understanding is it's just the employer share.
Sure.
But read the guidance, read the 11-page document, just in case I'm wrong.
No, that's what I figured. I just hadn't had a chance to delve into it yet.
It does say in the forgiveness application, the total amount paid for employer contributions for employee health insurance. So I think that would say that we have to deduct what the employee is paying.
So I still have to keep paying my share.
Yes.
That's fair enough. Well, I mean, I know this process has been frustrating and uncertain at times, but I also think it's been it's been a gift for so many of us, one less thing to worry about, you know, to be able to get those funds, reassure our staff, keep things coming in as we try to figure out what's next. Here's a question on transportation, and I've heard this both ways. So for transportation, would that be the mileage reimbursement that we give our employees?
So no, transportation only applies to the independent contractors that got the loan. So not us.
Okay, so that does not apply to nonprofits.
Right.
Another question here, will they release more official worksheets for us to use, like a PPP Schedule A worksheet? I hope so, but I don't know when. And again, that would be, I would trust your bank. They may develop their own separate one. And it's been clear during this process that the SBA is not used to working with nonprofits. You know, the language from the early on in the application, we're a whole different world. And so it's just been an interesting time. How about retirement benefits? Can you use any of this to put into your 403B?
So the employer portion of retirement plan, like the matching, is a payroll cost that's eligible.
Okay, so we could use that for what NAM matches for our staff, for example. Another question, does anybody know why rent lease isn't the same as mortgage principal? They're saying that their mortgage monthly payment is not forgivable.
The interest is eligible.
The interest is eligible.
Principal.
But
And
not,
you have to have that mortgage in place by, I think it's February 15th or something.
yeah, I think you have to have whatever your rent, mortgage, utilities set up by February 15th in order to take advantage of it. Well, we're getting close to time. I just want to thank everybody for taking a half hour out of your busy day. I hope this was helpful. We have recorded this. We will post it. We'll continue to share guidance with the CEO listserv. As we find out more, we'll share it with you. Hopefully everyone who's a NAM member saw last week, we also sent out a guide to considerations for thinking about when you're reopening or re-engaging with your clients. Thanks to our partners with Oklahoma Nonprofit Center that created that and co-branded it with us. And I'm seeing several thank yous. So thank you to Chris, thank you to Tracy. This has been helpful because if you, I love my bank, but they're not giving out any guidance. So I'm really grateful that I have quality accountants that I can go to. And with that, have a great day. Maybe go get some fresh air, take a walk around the block, stay safe, stay healthy. If you have questions, sure, you can just email the NAM team and we'll track it down. Okay.